Rachel, Kevin, Kim, where do you want us to start? Obviously we have the agenda, we have the policies that were sent out attached to the agenda. Rachel, I think you and I talked about convening the meeting. I don't know if you want to start us and then we can kick it to Kim or Kevin on where we are with policy on this.
Yeah, I think we should just review the bullying policy as it stands. I mean, if there's no need for any action, that's fine, but let's have the conversation. I want to get a pulse from Kevin as to just what the school climate is right now. So, I think, Kevin, if you want to take it.
That makes all the sense in the world.
Right. So, that's a wide open one in terms of school climate as it relates to bullying. But I think we've talked about this quite a bit in board meetings, particularly when we first reopened our schools, and the level of the social emotional challenges that were brought back into the buildings on the heels of the pandemic. It's certainly some of the more serious challenges that we had in the fall. We're not having, thank goodness, those same concerns. But our teachers and our administrators are still certainly experiencing, increased levels of support required for students who are still having trouble self-regulating. And so I think we're really just reviewing and figuring out how to support kids on the heels of the pandemic, and the fact that they were out of buildings for 18 plus months, particularly here in Danbury, and doing everything we can, not just academically trying to get kids caught up and accelerate learnings as we had, emphasized in some of our goals, but the social emotional piece and behavior and self-regulation has been an adjustment for us. And so because of that, we've seen increases in discipline, we've seen increases in suspensions, we've seen increases in expulsions. And so, those are certainly some of the challenges that we're experiencing. I would like to think as the school year continues and we continue to get back to more normal, some sense of normalcy, academics and our curriculum will be the agenda for the day, and there'll be less and less disruption in our schools. I would like to think so. I feel like the further we get from the beginning of the school year, things are getting better, but we're certainly still experiencing challenges.
Kevin, is there anything in particular with the bullying policy that you think we should address, adapt, modify, add to, take away from, or look at or talk about?
Yeah, I think the real tightening that needs to be done is with our protocols and how we're informing families, whether it's initiating excellent investigation and informing families after an investigation has been held. And so I think some of those protocols and regulations of the policy is where the opportunity is. But the policy itself, I think, despite when it was written, I think all of those things still resonate and is appropriate the way it's written.
Yeah, I certainly didn't see anything in it that I thought needed to come out. I just wasn't sure whether anything you needed to go in. Do you need us to address or look at regulations or tuning up those protocols and regulations? And obviously, if it's not on the agenda for tonight, we can't do it tonight, but we can certainly hold another meeting and put it on.
So the answer is yes, yes, yes. And I say yes, 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 because one, we are working with Shipman and Goodman to come in and provide a presentation to all of our administrators to update those regulations. We just feel like they're kind of outdated. And that's where our real opportunity is. And I think we are looking to having them come in during our admin time in June. And so we're just waiting on confirmation. And then again, sure, given that we have not seen any updates to the policy from Shipman and Goodman or K policies, we're seeing our opportunity truly with the regulations and having them come in, make a presentation, walk all the administrators through so that there's a admin council understanding of what's supposed to happen when a family or a child shares that there's concerns about bullying, how many days we have to respond to a family, how many days we actually have to conduct the investigation, and then what the reporting protocols are to be. And that's some training that we need to have, just to make sure the system, like we've all had the same training. And it's been a long time since we had the training from Shipman and Goodman, number one, but two, we've had quite a bit of transitions in admin over the years. So it's time for us to just make sure we're all on the same page, particularly with the increased number of bullying cases coming up. I'm sorry, discipline infractions, not necessarily bullying. I shouldn't say bullying specifically.
That's excellent. That sounds like a good plan. Is that some?
I lost you for a second, Joe.
I lost you too.
And just so you know, Joe, while you're trying to figure out your sound, you continue to try to disguise yourself as Dawn, but we know it's you.
Sorry. I really should get used to fixing that before these meetings, shouldn't I? Now that my internet is no longer, quote, unstable, unquote, is that presentation something that we can be looped in on? Not necessarily during the presentation if it's going to be during the day and it doesn't work, but even if there's written materials or whatever, or some kind of smaller version of it, even if Kim picks it up and gives it to us. I think it'd be helpful if we got some of that as well.
Yeah, I appreciate the ask, Joe. I think this policy in particular and the regulations associated with this one are just too important not to share. And frankly, typically in districts, they'll have, if you want to report bullying, you want to report bullying anonymously. There might be on some district websites, there might be an opportunity to report that, and the forms are available on the website. So that's my long way of saying absolutely, because we don't want to start doing any of those things until the board is aware of our feedback from Shipman. So absolutely, and if there are more questions, obviously Kim will be there and Kelly will be there. We can provide the feedback to the board.
Any members of the committee, Rachel, anybody have any questions or thoughts or concerns about what we just heard? It sounds like a plan.
Yeah, I guess I should have put just all of our discipline policies up here, not just the bullying, but how are families, again, I mean, we hear it all the time while we sit in expulsion hearings, but how are families notified of our policies around discipline?
So if it's my understanding in years past, what we've done is the policy is sent to families. High school is a handbook, middle schools is a handbook, and kind of the expectations are sent as part of an opening packet. In these last 2 years, some of those things may have not been sent out consistently. So that's something we're going to have to make sure is happening across all of our schools.
Thank you.
Anybody else with questions? Michelle, did I see your hand?
Yeah. Yes,
Perfect.
thank you. And then after that, after they have the actual binder, what is the process? If there is an incident, how does that actually escalate? In other words, what is the chain of command if somebody has some sort of an issue where there's suspension or expulsion or whatever is involved? What is that process, that chain of command?
So if there's a suspension at the school level, there is a notification of families sent from the principal's office. And so it might be the principal or designee. And so if it's a suspension, there is a suspension letter and call typically associated with the suspension. If the student is going to be out for a significant period of time, there are arrangements made to provide work while the student is not in school. And then, of course, if it's an expulsion, there's an additional layer of conversation and scheduling for the actual expulsion hearing. But that's kind of typically, if there's a discipline involved that requires a suspension, there's an official notification that comes from the school to the family, and a discussion also takes place.
I guess I'm kind of really digging down deep. Like, as soon as the incident occurs and the child is in trouble and is sent to the principal's office, sorry. What happens then? Is the parent called immediately, or is somebody else called at that time? Are they called before the parent? When does the parent actually in the chain of command notified?
Right. I think it's situational, right? And so if, and I think it also depends on the nature of the incident. I mean, we have some cases where a student can be removed from class and sent to the principal's office, and the teacher can get them back into class without any incident, and it doesn't require a school discipline at all. The student may not just need to be helped to get back in classroom. If it's a discipline issue
Right.
that's going to require out of school time, a number of things can happen, but an investigation has to happen. It really depends on the incident, right? And
I
so,
guess I'm
okay. Go
sorry.
ahead,
I guess I'm speaking more in the lines of possible suspension, or in the end, suspension. So if you have a child and there's an issue and it warrants suspension, what is the protocol in that regard? When is the parent brought in? Who is brought in? And like, if a phone call to the parents requested, is that acknowledged immediately? Is that put on hold? What is the process? Or
Right.
is this
So the student
something
is
that we need to
Mhm.
define?
Right. So the student, no, it's pretty well defined in our schools. So
Okay.
the student is not assigned a suspension without a notification to the family. And so that will happen with a phone call and a follow-up conversation with the family, walking the parents through, whatever the infraction was. And then formally, there's a letter that typically follows that conversation. But there is a communication that takes place to confirm that the child is not expected back in school for a certain amount of days. And then, of course, there needs to be a rationale why that decision has been made. And so the principal, assistant principal is having that conversation with the family, regarding that incident.
And it's only the principal and the parent that's in that discussion, or there are other
Principal
parties
or
involved?
designate, principal or assistant principal.
Only those three. There's no outside help or social, or no, there's no other service, or it's just the three
Not as part of
individuals?
that, right? Not as part of that conversation when notifying the family that the child is being suspended. Now, there certainly could be one as part of the reentry, or when it's time to talk about retribution, or services might be required. Certainly, those things will take place oftentimes, but just in terms of the process in which the suspension and the notification happens, it's principal, assistant principal, and we try to distance our PPS staff from that conversation, because we don't want to involve, the guidance counselor, who's supposed to be really objective in this process, and we don't want to include them in the disciplinary conversations, so that the student continue to access the counselor as a resource without any bad feelings about what may have happened in school.
Right. No, I completely agree with what everyone is saying here about actually focusing in on this issue. I just feel that, do we know what the increase in the percentage, let's say from the last 5 years past to where we are now? Do we have an idea of what that increase is that we've at least observed? Where obviously we do need to address it. I agree with everyone here on that matter. I'm just wondering, have we taken that into account, and to kind of get an idea of where we are?
Right, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but we've definitely had an increase in suspensions this year, and an increase in expulsions this year. I think it's kind of well chronicled in our budgeting for the 21-22 school year. We anticipated increases in behavior challenges this year, which is why we asked for additional PPS staff and deans for the high school to kick off the school year. And I think we needed that plus more, quite frankly.
I think that's excellent. Absolutely. I'm just, I guess, trying to say that I hope that area of what all that means. Obviously, we take into account what's occurred and why we're here, but that it's kind of really clearly defined for the parent or the child, the student himself, to realize, where are those boundaries? What are we looking at? What is that process? Where are you in that, when you're kind of getting, kind of maybe getting into trouble a little bit more than you may have in the past, kind of thing. So I'm just, I'm just asking for that reason. And I agree with everyone. I think it definitely needs to be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kate?
Thanks, Joe. I just wanted to say, I certainly think it's important for us to look at these policies, particularly since we're seeing an increase, in things going on in the schools. But I would just point out that, as a board, all we can do is set the policy, and that, to some degree, this is falling to our administration to deal with. And they have repeatedly asked for the funding to try to bring forward more mental health supports, both at the local level and at the state level. I know that there's a bill going through the education committee right now at the state level that is specifically around mental health support for students. And that's the kind of thing that, as a community here and communities across Connecticut, we really need to try to support and push forward so that we can get the kind of funding that's going to make it possible for us to put support staff in schools to deal with, the conflicts that may be happening there. I think there's only so much we can do through policy, unfortunately. Thanks.
Louisa, Bridget? Rachel, do you have anything else on this topic? Bridget, if you were talking, you were muted. Okay. Rachel, you have anything else on this one?
No, just to add, the board is really, our purview is policy. It's not so much regulation. I mean, that would be, under Kevin's purview. And
sure.
I mean, he could certainly give us information so that we're aware of it. But yeah, our job is that policy level.
Oh yeah, no. My question was just give us the information just in case we have to impact policy or something. Mm-hmm. The regs are certainly within Kevin's purview for sure.
Right.
That's getting way too far into the weeds for us. Okay, I think that's it on this one. The next one on the agenda was, I believe, public speaking at the board meetings. Something I realized this evening, because Kate pointed it out for me. We have a public speaking policy. It's 9325.31. 93.25 actually talks about it too. Can everybody hear me, or am I locked up again?
You're good.
I'm good. Okay. Believe it or not, our conduct of the meeting section of our bylaws actually limits public speaking to 30 minutes. Obviously, we can extend it if we want to. The irony is that's actually not in the public speaking section of the minutes or of the bylaws, which I thought was interesting. Kate pointed out. I'm like, probably makes sense to have it all in one spot. But Rachel, did you want to start off on that? Because you and I had talked about it at least once before.
Just about the maximum time frame?
No, just the policy in general.
In general. So what I'd like the committee to consider is a couple things. We had people from other towns come speak to our meeting, which we don't have. It's not addressed in our bylaws. So just something to consider is limiting it to Danbury residents, immediate family members directly connected to a Danbury student or a Danbury Public School employee, regardless of where they live. I think they should be able to come to us, but I mean, that's just my thought on that. I know City Council limits it to Danbury residents only. So we could certainly do that, but then you're limiting it to, the folks who attend magnet school and
Right.
employees
Staff.
who live out of town. So that's one. The other thing to discuss is what was I lost my train of thought with that one. What was the other thing?
While you put the train back on the rails, I can actually help
Yes, go ahead.
touch on that. Ironically, our existing bylaws kind of they're kind of awkwardly and badly worded. It kind of indicates a limitation to people who live in Danbury. It actually says the Board of Education considers it important to have the viewpoints of citizens of Danbury and school staff. Now, citizens is absolutely positively the wrong term. You're not a citizen of a state or a municipality. You're a resident. Did I lock up again?
No.
Here you go.
Nope. Okay, good. So what we probably should do, and I agree with you wholeheartedly, Rachel, is probably be a little bit more specific for two reasons. The way it's written here, I mean, citizens is again the wrong term. It's certainly not explicit enough. If read the wrong way, you're absolutely right. It would limit the ability of not just parents of students at the magnet school, but let's say the the divorced family where one parent lives in Bethel and one parent lives in Danbury. So it probably should be a little bit more specific. The other problem too is this: it could be interpreted here to limit school staff to Danbury, and obviously we don't want to do that. We should, I think, the logical revision would be to have the viewpoints of something to the effect of, residents of the city of Danbury, students or parents, students, who attend Danbury schools, the parent of a Danbury school student, Danbury taxpayer, and any staff or employee, any member of the staff or employee. I don't want to limit it, obviously, to teachers. We may have a janitor who wants to come and speak. We may have a lunch lady who wants to come and speak, which is almost certainly the wrong term I just used. But, there could, we have, how many employees do we have? 1,500 employees, and more if you include the bus drivers. I think we want to make sure that we're clear that any staff or employee can come and speak. And the city, and this is actually would be a little bit broader than the council's criteria, because the city council limits it to residents and taxpayers. Because you can actually be a Danbury taxpayer without being a resident. Terry.
I like your list, but people who work here, would that also include their family coming to talk? Or just the people who work?
It's an interesting question. I hadn't thought about it.
I mean, just throwing it out there.
Yeah.
I understand.
No, it's an interesting question. I wouldn't think of an employee's immediate family, but I suppose there could be a situation. That may be rare enough that we can kind of leave it in the chair's discretion. I mean, the chair always has the discretion to recognize anybody.
Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
but it's a really interesting question. I know that it would come up a lot, but it's certainly something that could come up for sure.
But I like your list.
And like I said, it's a little broader than the city, who limits it to taxpayers and residents.
Right.
I think we need to be a little broader because we need to include all of our employees. I think we need to include the parents of our magnet school kids and any parent who doesn't happen to live in Danbury but has a child who goes to Danbury schools.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Any thoughts, Kate, Louisa,
Yeah.
Michelle?
Yeah, I do. So what about people that fall within the district? Like, for instance, so they're speaking a lot of talk about open choice. Open choice would allow other towns to actually interact with Danbury. So how is it that would be handled? Should that actually be implemented or not? Whatever the case is, because I know with zoning, we take in all the other local towns' opinions, surveys into the overall, solution, I guess. So same as we did when we were looking at several of the charts and slides that we've been seeing throughout the last year of the Board of Ed. So would that be the case now? What if would that limit that? Any exchange with any parent or family that interacts with Danbury, even though they are not a taxpayer, would that be also included?
Well, if you have a student who, like use New Fairfield, for example, if you have a New Fairfield student who's coming to Danbury in open choice, obviously they'd be the parent of a Danbury school student for sure. Just a general member of the population of New Fairfield.
Well, no, I guess. Sorry.
I'm trying to make sure I understand the question. Are you speaking about somebody
is,
specifically with a student here under open choice, or just the general person who lives in one of those towns?
It's not here yet. The conversation isn't on the table, but it's clearly in the area circulating. So for us to implement a policy like this could really hinder part of the 24th district, as well as other surrounding neighborhoods that actually may be brought into this process. So I want to know before we make a decision like that, and we know that there's other discussions being had, I don't want to limit this board. So that can't be addressed later unless there's a policy committee or something like that.
We can always go back and modify it. We can always go back and modify a policy. And again, something's always obviously in the discretion of the chair. But then again, there's 87,000 people, roughly 88,000 people who live in the city of Danbury. Frankly, if I were one of them, and I am one of them, I would be very annoyed if the board were acting to do something based on the opinion of somebody who lives in New Fairfield who doesn't have a student who goes to Danbury schools. We should be taking into consideration the opinions of people who live in Danbury, whose students go here, whose children go here, who work here, who pay taxes in Danbury, not really the opinions of people who live in other towns that don't have a connection to Danbury or our schools like that. Now, obviously, you raise an interesting issue with open choice. We're not here yet. That's not, I mean, no town has agreed to join us yet. Maybe that's something we need to address when we get to that point, another town agrees. Maybe we look at it.
Well,
but in the absence of it.
That should be something that's incorporated somehow, that it is an option, or that it somehow can be addressed, because we would hate to close the barn doors and then already know that there is stuff coming in that we won't be able to address because maybe we've tied our hands on the matter.
We always have the power to come back and modify a policy, which is what we're looking at here.
Sometimes it takes a while to find the time and the calendar. There's issues. So it's just something that I feel that, based on the fact that I'm looking at my district alone, that issue is, and it goes across the board. It's important to all three, and they're all involved.
Your current district in relation to this job is the city of Danbury.
And it is. I'm in the 138th ward, and I'm telling you now that this is a discussion that's coming up for Danbury Public Schools. From the guidance from CAVE and our attorney, there's several things happening. So I just want to make it clear that I wouldn't want to necessarily vote on current changes to the policy based on a certain lens, when we know that there is more surrounding the issue. That's all.
It's understood. I think the purpose of this is to make sure that we're hearing from people with an actual connection to the Danbury Public Schools, not a hypothetical connection to the Danbury Public Schools. But, if and when a town acts,
we prepare.
Correct.
We are preparing for other things in budgets and in every aspect. So we should prepare when we are writing our policy to meet the needs of today and the future, possibly.
Agreed. Right. And our concerns should be the concerns of the citizens of Danbury, not the residents of, for example, New Fairfield or Bethel or Brookfield.
Joe, you have two other people with their hands.
I'm sorry.
Other people with their hands up.
Yeah.
I see Kate. I see Kate. Bridget, did you as well?
Let me finish my last comment. Let me just finish my last comment.
Mm-hmm.
If if the implementation of open choice is being had in Danbury as one of its model locations, then it's something that the Danbury board or that the Danbury
Mhm.
board of the public schools should be, as we are in line with the 5 programs for literacy and everything else, the building out and overcrowding, all those other options. This also is one, just as Rachel has pointed out, bullying, and I agree with Kevin on the social emotional. I mean, there's a lot of aspects to be considered, and we're forward thinking. This would be one of them.
Thank you. Kate.
Thank you.
So a couple things about the open choice piece. One, the other, area of residents of the other areas that we might potentially be sending children to have to opt in. So that's a responsibility of those individual municipality boards to make that decision and to get feedback from their communities about that participation. 2, if you decide that you want your child to participate in this program, you have to opt in to have your child participate in it. So somebody sending a child from our district to another district has to make that decision on their own. And then their child is a part of that other school district at that point, and now they're interacting with that school board to express concerns that they might be experiencing or problems they might be dealing with. So I think, we have a mechanism here, and I think when you talk about the magnet school, for example, where you have kids coming from other districts into our district to come to school here, I think we need to be careful about how we phrase the policy here so that we make sure that those parents and those guardians are included, so that they can come to us when they have an issue with their student or with something going on with the school system. So I hear what you're saying, Michelle, but I just think, for the program we're talking about and for our responsibility as a board here in Danbury, our concern has to be with Danbury schools and with Danbury students and feedback from folks who are part of that community, whether they are living in the bounds of Danbury or whether they're directly, they're outside of the bounds of Danbury, but it has to be a direct connection to our school system because that's our function. So I think
Kate,
I
agree.
Hey, Michelle, I had other people with hands up. Bridget, Kim, I think were you looking at something here too?
I was just going to say, I think what I would urge you to take a step back and think about what you're hoping to achieve with this policy, because we haven't had a lot of experience with people from other districts coming in or other cities until we had this conversation about the masks in the last meeting, is I think when it really came up. And I think, this is not the only forum in which someone can express an opinion about something the board's doing. I mean, there's always people who write letters, we do surveys. So I think that part of what this policy is designed to do is to give you a flavor of what the community is thinking at a given time, but to do it in a manner that is organized so as not to overwhelm your meetings. And if there are certain topic specific things like open choice, there is always the opportunity to make a content specific call for opinion. And so, the chair could post, we would be interested in hearing feedback about open choice at this meeting and modify what rules you have for public comment. I think the one thing that I would urge is that as you think about whether this is really a mechanism for controlling kind of the course of your meetings and hearing in a measured way some opinions, to think a little bit broadly about how you write the rules so that you are not always changing them or deciding not to enforce them this time, but enforce them that time, because that's almost worse. And so you want it to be something that you feel like the chair can kind of consistently provide the guidelines without putting her, in this case, her in a position to have to make more exceptions than there are other rules. So those are kind of my general thoughts about this.
Yeah, that's true. These are certainly not things we can always go back and modify, but you don't want to do it every 15 minutes for sure.
Kim, well said. Thank you. That's exactly what my intention was. Thank you so much for making that very clear.
And it's a really good point that we can always solicit opinion or comment from whomever we want. There's a general policy. The chair obviously always has the ability to solicit beyond that, or just allow any comment with discretion of the chair at a meeting anyway. And and usually it won't matter because, as Kim noted, this is not something that happens regularly, but it's certainly something we want to have,
Be prepared
a
for.
handle on.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank
And here's the thing, arguably the existing bylaws already say somebody who lives in, for example, Brookfield isn't somebody that we're looking for comment from. They already say that kind of. What we're really talking about here is just being a little bit more clear and a little bit more specific, because it says citizens of Danbury anyway, which obviously implies people who live here.
Right.
I also think too that it's very important to have this conversation because these things come up, as you know, on the spur of the moment. And so you're
Right.
often in a situation where you're like, right. And not so much in where the person's from, but if somebody starts talking about an employee, you know, we have pretty clear prescriptions about that.
Yep.
Or if they start talking about their student, and sometimes you're sort of a step behind in trying to control the dialogue. So this is an important conversation, I think.
It becomes very hard to like react without being rude.
Right, exactly.
Bridget, did you have anything? I couldn't.
So I think a lot of my points were already covered, but
Okay.
it seems the conversation is really just about inclusivity and equity in making sure that we're hearing all the voices that are appropriate for us to hear, and that we're not stifling other people who have to have, you know, the people who should be part of the conversation, that we're making time for them because they are the ones who students go here who teach in our schools. So, you know, I appreciate everything that Kim and had to say. I think that sums it up. But I think that clarity is important too. And so, you know, taking a look at those bylaws, I'm not sure when the last time we've had a bylaw revision. Maybe Kim, you could speak to that. That's a whole different world of conversation for bylaw revision. And maybe that's something we need to think about, not just as one simple piece, but as a piece of a whole. And so that takes it in a whole different direction. But, you know, to Michelle's point, having these and Kim's and Kate's having these conversations about inclusivity and equity just help clarify so that when it does come up, we're ready. And Kim, I would just be interested, just out of curiosity at this moment, when was the last time we did a big bylaw review?
Well, this
Funny to say that.
year, and we haven't done it since I've been here.
No, we
Well-
reviewed our bylaws
How
just
many?
recently.
Well, this
No.
board policy is 2008.
We reviewed all of the bylaws as part of the 2019, in 2019, every single one, because the poor committee actually was entertaining for me because you can only imagine how rich the discussions were. But before we created the policy, the bylaw manual for the board, each one actually was revisited by the board at that time in the subcommittee of the policy committee at that time. So Teresa, you're right. Some of those policies actually, the approval date has not changed because there was no action on them.
Right.
But in cases where those dates have changed, it's because the committee actually made adjustments to them.
So can I make
Great.
one more comment? So that's wonderful. You know, if we've had a bylaw review in 2019, then we are up to date. We are, you know, taking a look at policies by themselves. So that's a really healthy thing. And I think that speaks well of the district that we've done this kind of work. And I did the royal we, but I wasn't involved in any kind of way. So I'm impressed that you guys did all of that work. So that's a lot. So changing small pieces of the bylaw is complicated, and maybe spending a little bit of time in rewriting the section, Joe, that you were talking about is something that we could do as a group, just so that we do have that kind of clarity. And to Michelle's point, that equity.
Just wait. The general policy review that Rachel's led for the last, 3-4 years, we will be starting that up again soon, where we get to look at whole chunks of whole policies all in one shot. The last 2 meetings have been rare. Most of them will not be nearly this entertaining. We can certainly look at this. I can certainly work with Kim to put together some clarifying language for the next policy committee meeting, if that's the pleasure of the committee, that we can look at and maybe do some clarifying here. Because again, arguably, this already does what we're talking about clarifying. It already limits it to people in Danbury. Now, one issue that I didn't even thought about, Rachel had actually told me about, was some staff don't necessarily feel comfortable coming and commenting at a meeting because they don't live in Danbury. Now, this does say school staff, but clarifying and making it sure that the people who work for the district know they can come to a board meeting, I think also has a lot of merit too, because we certainly don't want them not to come
So
because
Joe,
they happen to live in Newtown.
Joe,
Yes, Kevin.
I'm wondering if, as part of when we read the expectations for public participation, that first line is tweaked, and who the board actually
be.
does invite in to come and talk and speak.
Yeah.
And so whatever language the committee lands on, we make sure it's included in that first sentence. Hey, the board welcomes, right? And then we outline and be very clear who we welcome in. Of course.
Exactly.
Mhm.
It's a
Yeah,
fine
it should be
idea.
specifically bulleted.
Well, this is the reason why maybe tonight's not the night to amend our bylaws on the fly, because ironically, Kevin, that's a really good idea I hadn't thought about.
Yeah.
What we read at the beginning of our meetings is actually in a bylaw. It's in a different one. It's in
That's right.
9325, which is the conduct of the meeting bylaw. The irony, of course, is that's where the 30-minute time limit on public participation exists, not in public participation. Now that's okay. You read them together, and you can, as Kim will laugh when I say this, you can read them harmoniously. But yeah, we're looking at that opening sentence, that italicized sentence at the beginning of the public address bylaw probably makes a lot of sense. This way we make them consistent. Well, we can certainly.
So which one
I'm
are you
sorry.
going to change? Which one are you looking at to change?
It's not a lot of change, Terry. It's, if you were to look at 9325.31, it's on it says page 35 at the bottom of the
Yeah,
page
I've
in
got
the
it.
packet.
Yeah, I've got but you were referencing another one?
I'll get to that in a sec, but if all that I'm talking about is when you see viewpoints of in the first sentence, just making citizens that longer list of people. That's all.
Okay.
No, if you go
All right.
back to page 31 in that packet. Yes, Kim.
I was going to say, at the last meeting, I think it was last meeting, you had someone who made a comment asking if you would continue the email comments, which goes, I think.
That
to
was the other
point
thing
you're
Rachel forgot.
raising about people feeling uncomfortable, and you might want to talk about whether you want to amend the policy to do that.
Yeah. That was the other thing that the
That I
train
couldn't
went off the rails.
remember.
on.
Yeah.
Neither could I, and I knew you wanted to
I'm
talk
like,
about
I knew
that.
there was something else.
Yeah.
Yes, that's exactly
Um,
it. So, yeah.
To put a pin on this one, Terry, if you look at on page 31, it's 9325. If you look at where it says public address, there's that italicized sentence that comes right after the words public address. That's the sentence we read off of our agenda at the beginning of every meeting on public comment. I think that's the one Kevin was talking about, maybe tweaking to make consistent with whatever we do to the public speaking policy.
Thank you.
Rachel,
Yes.
email comments.
Emailed comments. So it's come up a couple times. I'm going to be honest with you and be very clear in how I feel. I'm not a huge fan of the emails because for several reasons. Email could be from anyone, anywhere. We're talking about limiting in-person public participation to, but this could be from anyone. I mean, we could ask for your full name and physical home address in the email. So it just further makes it very complicated in that sense. And then the other thing is the public has access to us via email all the time. They can email us at any time, the full board. Our email addresses are on the district website. So, and I also feel that behind a computer gives people a different sense of, I don't know what the right word is, courage, and then you run into like, well, how do you present? How do you limit the time? Do you limit time when you read it out loud in a meeting? It just becomes very complicated. So that's my thought on that. But I didn't want the decision to be made in a vacuum. So I'd love the committee to have the discussion, and I'd like to hear your feedback on that.
Terry, and then Bridget.
Uh,
Just because that's the order I saw your hands.
I was thinking maybe one way would be have a form for email comments to fill out. The name, rank, serial number, and explanation, that type of thing. Just have it all, so they have to, all fields need to be populated. Just a suggestion.
It's an interesting way to do it. Bridget?
Good.
So I see what Rachel is saying about the complexity of accepting commentary from people that we cannot see or interact with. And don't know for sure are in the district. But I'd like to just throw out that this is a complicated district where parents work 2 jobs, and some people have accessibility and mobility issues and other issues that might make the attendance at a meeting rather challenging. And so email is an easy way, or a fair way for people who have challenges in attendance to get their point across. And I'd hate to see it go away, because I'd like to make sure that we are as fair and as transparent and as possible. And so having that email option in a way, maybe as Terry suggested, in a very, in a different kind of format, maybe in a formalized manner, makes it fair across the district. And I know that we're all trying to get to that place, so that we're hearing the voices, and we're making sure that people are part of the discussion. And I don't want to necessarily take email away, because I feel like if we did that, we might create a stumbling block to people whose voices should be part of the conversation. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Michelle, I saw your hand.
Yeah.
Kate, I saw you
my
too.
goodness. Oh my goodness.
Uh-oh.
Sorry.
There
I
you are.
lost you. There you go.
Zoom
Sorry.
users back.
Sorry. I agree, because there are certain people that don't even speak English, and they can type out their email. It will translate. Perhaps they can have another family member convey their messages. So I think email, as we are preparing, it seems our whole curriculum around technology is clearly something that is used every day. So I think that would just be a sense of the times. Maybe we can implement some way of, taking the weight off of whoever that individual is getting all that additional work from, and, kind of distribute it, and somehow figure that out, or maybe Kevin can. But I think it is important to keep that open somehow in Parent Square or whatever we were initially discussing.
Thank you. Kate?
Thank you.
I concur that, this is for me is an equity issue. But I do like Terry's idea. If you did something through like a Google Forms, where folks had to fill out, name, rank, and serial number, but then also you could limit the size of the field where they're providing comments, so that, to Rachel's point, the person who's reading these aloud, doesn't have to spend 5 minutes reading that out loud. And it sort of, puts some level of cap on, the feedback that we're getting. I think it might be also important to consider that, we're not going to read anything that has inappropriate content in it, because I don't think, that's something that I think we should explicitly, state as part of this.
Thank you, Kate. My 2 cents, and I agree with a lot of what Rachel just said about some of the issues we've had, and for Bridget, Michelle, Terry, these are some of the issues Rachel was just identifying, are some issues we had last year. Number one, there was no way to know who some of the people were, and there were emails, and I think there was one this year as well, but there were emails that just smelled like they weren't really from anybody who was local. More importantly, there were also instances where we were being dunned with what were clearly form emails, where you get the same email from 7 different people, or 3 different people would send the same exact email in, and our secretaries reading, our minutes, our functional secretaries sitting there reading 3 emails that say exactly the same thing at a meeting. But I also agree that there's a certain benefit to being able to email, especially if you can't physically get there or you don't speak the language. Honestly, I hadn't even thought of that. That's definitely a concern. Maybe part of the solution is, as Terry said, you create a form. The other part of the solution may be this: these are written comments. We don't need to read them in a meeting. They can be circulated to us as members in advance of the meeting, and they can certainly be appended to and made a part of our minutes, so that they are public comments. They don't necessarily need to be read. More importantly, reading them at the meeting, we had emails during the last 2 years that were truncated, that weren't read in full because it would take longer than 3 minutes to read them. A couple of them probably would have taken 5 or 6 minutes to read. So that may be someplace where we land, where instead of, we allow the comment to come in by email, but instead of reading them at the meeting, we distribute them to all of us and make them part of our minutes. And this way, we all get the emails. We get to read them. We get to go back and reflect on them rather than just hearing them in a meeting and letting it go out into the ether after we heard it. Terry.
And we could limit so many words in the description of the
sure.
Of the comment. And we can also do the, I'm not a computer,
Recapture. Yep.
Yeah, that type of thing.
Yep.
I think that would help, I'm sure. And have a Spanish form, English and Spanish form, or in Portuguese. So whatever they feel comfortable, and then it gets translated to English for us. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, those things, those would all work either whether we're reading them or whether we're getting them in print. Because sometimes I think I'd almost rather get them physical emails so I can actually sit there and read them rather than just hear them at a meeting while we're trying to do other business. Is this something where we think we need a policy, or maybe we should draft some kind of policy, Rachel, for consideration at the next policy meeting? What do you think? I ask for your opinion both because you're the past policy chair and our chair.
Yeah. I think if you, I don't know if it warrants a policy. I mean, I would refer to Kim on this. I mean, we could put something in, our public participation policy, but maybe it doesn't warrant a policy.
True. Yeah. We can always do everything what we want by practicing Robert's rules. Kim?
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm wondering, are there regulations? I haven't looked at that to see if there's anything else supporting that we can kind of tweak a little bit. I mean, I think I try to always think about what's the purpose of the rule or the policy. And if it's that, it's equity and equitable access, as Bridget's talking with people that can't physically get to a meeting, what are we trying to accomplish? And so I think you can tweak a regulation that says if there are alternative means with which people would like to communicate with the board, here's one way, or something like that. And then obviously within your discretion as the chair, you could or could not, I suppose, read them at a meeting if you chose to. I would think it's important to honor the inquiry with some kind of a forum for folks that are looking for an alternative way than coming to the meeting. But I think a regulation would do that so that you would be a little bit more nimble.
So bylaws don't necessarily have regulations.
Well, wouldn't this be with is there not a public, I thought there was a public policy. I mean, I thought there was
you could do it as a regulation to the public speaking policy.
Right, exactly. Thank you. That's what
we could work with Kevin on a regulation of the public speaking policy.
Right, because we've got these kind of scattered across these documents, right? So you could link it to one of those policies.
And some of the stuff here can just, as a simple matter of parliamentary procedure, some of it could be the discretion of the chair or just a vote of the membership. In other words, if we had everything distributed before the meeting and there are 5 emails that are distributed, somebody could make a motion. I move we waive reading of the emails and make them part of the minutes and just vote on it.
Yeah.
That's the other
So
option.
I just want to make sure I'm following. If we are looking to adopt email public participation or electronic public participation, I'm not sure email would be the best way to do this, and I'll share some thoughts in a second. But if it's an electronic public participation, it seems to me that should be included in the policy, and then we would come up with a form that would be acceptable by the board to receive this information.
Okay.
And then, I mean, that's just my initial thoughts anyway, after hearing the dialogue.
Carrie?
Also, when we get a comment, should we require that we respond? Or just the acknowledgement that it was received? I think there should be some sort of feedback, that it doesn't go into the realm of the never land.
Generally speaking, general comments to the board address that we've used for the last couple of years when we were meeting remotely, there may have been an acknowledgement that the email was received, but generally we don't, much like the comments at the meetings, we don't generally respond directly to them. In theory we can, but generally we don't. Emails, obviously, to our email and our email addresses, we all respond however we all respond. Sometimes there are emails I respond to and thank you for your email. There's other ones I respond a little bit more detailed. Some I probably don't answer at all. But generally speaking, the general emails we got in the general comment email, we didn't necessarily respond, certainly in any detail. And that email address that we were using for comments was a on the fly thing to accommodate public comment during our remote meetings. Kevin raises a very good point. This isn't so much an email issue as electronic comment, which may be a different format than email. Kim, I'm sorry, you had your hand up.
No, I'm sitting here kind of listening to this discussion, and I'm wondering, and I'm spitballing a little bit here, but I'm wondering if there isn't a different vehicle for people who can't get to a meeting to express a concern to the board. Like we mentioned a little while ago in this meeting about you can always email, and this may be a terrible idea, but I'm thinking about not really like a bulletin board, like an electronic bulletin board or some other vehicle that's not part of do we incorporate it into the minutes? Do we read it at a meeting, where we could meet Bridget's goal of making sure that people's voices are heard across all sectors by you, but it may not be in the meeting context. I don't know if that makes any sense. I'm kind of making it up as I'm going along here, but.
Like in
Certainly an
Parent
interesting
Square or
idea.
something? Like Parent Square, if it had its own kind of area that you could go to?
So
Is that what you mean? Something like that?
I think, Michelle, if we're talking about public participation, we could certainly put together some type of survey where our families and, parent participants, if they're interested in submitting comments, they can include their name, their email address. We can match it automatically if they're an employee or a parent in this community. There may be some folks who don't necessarily fit in there, but if they're connected to our system, those emails will match one way or the other. But we've certainly had enough experience in this district with Google Forms or other surveys, and we can set that up on our website. And as an extension of the board agenda, they can click on that, and public participation could be submitted in that form. We can have, they could be 3 or they could be 30. And we can all aggregate them. We can have a record of them. We can have their email address in there, their first name, last name, to some of the points that Teresa had raised earlier. And we can limit the comment section, right? We can limit the number of words that can be included in there to make sure it doesn't last more than 3 minutes. So I think we could develop a system, pretty easily, and kind of direct families and people who want to participate through some type of form. So not terribly different from the Parent Square, but at least it would be a structure in which folks could participate.
That's great. I think that's great.
Yeah, sounds good.
I think it would help with community relations as well. Kate, I think.
Kevin, you had an interesting point. Maybe we need to look at whether something like this should go towards our policy. The good thing is we're not amending that policy tonight. We have to look at it for another policy meeting. Maybe this is something we look at to deal with that policy, because it's the same policy we'd be amending. So maybe this is something we look at in connection with that as well. We work on some language. And maybe it's possible that somebody else has a policy that we can look at and crib off of or use as a template. But I like the notion of some kind of electronic comment more than just a blanket email address. Here, all the world, please email to this address. Because
Right. Right.
Rachel has a really good point. There were emails that really looked curious. Let's just leave it at curious.
I'm sure.
I mean, and we got them to our personal emails as well, our board emails as well. They were curious,
Yeah,
to say the least.
I think we all received them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I'm not even talking recently. I'm talking the last 2 years. You know, actually, ironically, the last run of stuff we had, as much controversy as there was, I didn't see that many that I thought were really curious, that were like really oddly, like, you know, not real or not local.
Out of nowhere.
Most of those, I think, were like real people who were here. But yeah, maybe it's something we do some wordsmithing on and drafting into the existing policy. Maybe it's just the next sentence of the last paragraph.
Or as Kim suggests, maybe just have it as a vehicle.
Yeah.
I mean, we're redoing our website anyway.
Yep.
Maybe in that board member portion of
Yeah.
the new website, there's a click here to
Yeah.
send, you know, to write to your Board of Education.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
not even part of this,
Yeah.
Yeah.
you know, policy.
Decouple it from a meeting, so people don't think they're limited to commenting related to a meeting.
Right.
Well,
Yeah.
that's true. Yeah. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Make it more, yeah. And if possibly
more-
if we develop, we could maybe begin exchanging, you know, but at least
Yeah.
start it off that way. I think that's great.
Yeah.
And I think putting it on the website is a great idea, Rachel. That's an accessibility thing, you know.
Yeah. If people are
Yeah.
looking us up, they'll see, hey, there's a comment section.
Yeah, well, but I like that notion, actually. The combination of Rachel's idea related to Kim's, almost decouple it from the meeting. So it's not so much comment to the board related to a meeting or what people would assume is related to an agenda, but just
Joe,
make it comment to us, period.
Kara
Yes, Kevin.
Kara has extensive experience with surveys in the district, and she might also have some ideas here as well. We can lend on her expertise here.
Works for me.
And I do think that there's ways to create a form, a Google form, where you're forced to fill out the first 5 or 6 sections. It does not let you advance unless you complete those pieces. There's
Right.
also a way to create an add-on so you can actually upload identification. You can snap a picture of your driver's license or some other type of photo ID that might indicate, you know, where you're from. And I also believe that there's a way to do voice notes as well. So even if a person felt it difficult to actually type in a paragraph, that you can load in a voice note and upload it the same way that you can upload a driver's license and then just hit the send button. But I can certainly play around with it and see different ways that we can configure it. But there's ways to kind of at least flesh out a minimum amount of information that would kind of validate who a person is.
So in other words, Terry, your idea is possible and Karen knows how to do it.
I have some.
Good
I'm
job.
sorry. I'm sorry. I just.
Yes, Michelle.
Yes. The only part that I think, and I haven't really thought it through and all of but when I first heard the comment about the driver's license, I just think a lot of people would be apprehensive for whatever reason they might have. They are in the school system, whatever their background is, whatever is going on in their life. I think that might actually stifle them a little bit. Or the community. I don't know what everybody else's thoughts are, but that was just like a first kind of.
No, I agree,
It's
Michelle.
a fair point.
We,
Yeah.
we don't want to create a process that's going to suggest we're going to create more barriers to the process. So
Yeah, that's a very fair point. It also would impact people that don't have one.
My,
Or people that are going through something that, you
Right,
know, they
right.
don't.
Or just don't have a
somebody
driver's
else
license.
that's- Yeah, or, you know, whatever, you know. Just,
Yeah.
yeah.
I guess the point is that I think we can program it the way,
Yes,
any way that the
absolutely.
board wants to see it.
And I think the comment was more, I think Kara's comment was more, I try to
Yes.
do something to honor the notion that they're connected to the district. And I think Kevin had a good point before. We may be able to email match them now because basically just about every parent has an email address in the system. Terry.
students, some of them won't have an ID. And if we're going to be accepting comments from students as well,
But
we
they all
gotta-
have a student,
don't
they all
forget
have a
them.
student email.
Yeah.
They do.
Student ID number, an employee
In-
ID number.
Really, in an elementary school, or I mean,
Oh,
middle
yeah.
school?
Elementary school too.
Okay.
Elementary
Yeah,
school.
but
My son's on Google Docs all the time, and he's in fourth grade.
Wow.
Oh yeah, what they can do. And by the way, what they learned how to do on a computer in the last 2 years is absolutely astounding.
Yeah.
You know, it worked a lot. Doesn't mean they don't complain about their IXL homework.
For gives and takes, right? Gives and takes.
Yep, you got it. Anybody else? Do we have anything else we need to address this evening?
What's for
Wow,
dinner?
here,
How about what's
yeah,
for
well,
dinner?
it's an excellent question. I'm about to go into my kitchen and figure out right now. Everybody have a wonderful evening. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Made by Kate, seconded by Terry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it.